Welcome to our webinar. The CIO Hot Button of the Year is Application Adoption. Wonder why? Today we're going to share best practices and new technologies that enable best-in-class companies to improve their application adoption. We're going to share a view of the state of the union. Where is all of this today? We're going to talk a little bit about the value prop, which is the million-dollar question for all of you. And we're going to illustrate and overview the adoption gap. We'll segue to best practices and then to the demonstration so that you can get a sense of a small bit of the technology that makes this possible. And we'll move quickly from there into questions and survey. I think most of you know Noah is a leader in user experience and performance management. We have over 20% of the Fortune 50 as customers and hundreds of Global 5,000 customers. And you can read a lot more about us on our website. Certainly many of the customer logos that you know and hundreds more available through our website, so we won't slow down too much there. So let's first take a look at this phenomenon, the enthusiasm and excitement that goes around with application adoption, and talk about what it really is. So software application adoption is a process which includes first, the preparation for the deployment of a new software application or a new release or version of an existing one. So it's not just hands-on, your team struggling to get full utilization of an enterprise application. It's also thinking about getting ready and the things you need to do to make that go as well as it can go. Two, it's the processes associated with the ongoing deployment of that application. All the things that keep it deployed and current and user-friendly and active across all of the key business processes that you need to support. Number three, it is the objective comparative assessment over time of the efficiency and effectiveness of utilization. And this is where the new thinking comes in, and where new technology has started to now impact best practice. And the best practices now that are enabled and utilized to take you from one level of performance to what you will see as best-in-class levels. And you start to ask the question, well, how do I know where I am? How do I know where I'm going? How do I even begin to measure this? Two things we'll talk about, certainly the first one most heavily during the course of this presentation and the hands-on with some of the technology, is the notion of a super user adoption gap. So the first thing you know in your world, if you don't know anything about your competitors or anything about other companies, and truly the data available to or through industry analysts is very, very limited. Most of the companies that are using this technology today that are pioneering application adoption are doing the heavy lifting themselves because of the high reward, but there are not a lot of experts out there to help them. So the first place you start is understanding your own best-in-class users. And the first thing the technology will highlight is a view towards who on my team in this enterprise application that I'm looking at today really is a super user in terms of performance, in terms of efficiency, in terms of effectiveness. Who are my mainstream users? We love them, but they don't perform like these other users. And then where are the underperforming groups? Is it a function of geography? Is it a function of department? Is it a function of job title? Certainly new team members that have been through hiring may be lagging in terms of overall skills. And so immediately inside your organization, you can start to see a spectrum of performance. And now you're getting close to the edge of the million-dollar question, which is, why is this so important and why is this so valuable? The enterprise adoption gap is the one that's much harder to derive. Data will creep out slowly, and we're building metrics, but ultimately what you want to know is for a company of your class, your industry, your structure, your go-to-market, probably in your section of the world, or as a multinational compared to other multinationals, how do your best-in-class and your mainstream users compare for some transactions that might be more standard between you and your peers than not? And that's certainly the holy grail of data, because ultimately, for your CEO and your board of directors and your executive staff, that will translate to a significant impact on bottom line operation and performance. In the final analysis, the adoption gap is about time and it's about error. It's about business process, what's actually happening versus what is really expected to happen. And if you said, well, this all makes sense, but why is this, joining the 15 minutes of fame that is pushing it into the limelight? And the answer is that the word is out. The word is out that the impact of application adoption and finding and adopting the early technologies that make this measurable and comparable and enable you to improve it are worth a tremendous amount of money to a major enterprise corporation. And when I say major enterprise corporation, you will see benefits if you have hundreds of users. You will see large benefits if you have thousands of users. And for the few of you out there that maybe have 10 or 20 or 50,000 users, the benefits will be on a massive scale. And when you say, well, where is this being used? Why is it that we can't go to a conference and find 20 companies doing this? Well, because today, based upon our data, we think that just about 5% maybe of the global 5,000 optimistically are using this technology at all. And we doubled that just to suggest that there may be data we don't have access to, but we think we're pretty close. As we all know, if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. Finally, for the companies that are successful, you go back to those dollars that we're burning, there would be other dollars or euros or pounds or whatever your currency is being saved. There are many, many companies that have pioneered this that are saving millions in hard operating expense. So they're reducing costs and they're gaining millions in productivity, and these are huge numbers. And so you really want to dig into, well, how is this happening and what do I have to do to participate? One case study that I need to keep anonymous, but certainly an account that we talk about quite a bit in other contexts, told me verbally that they expect to save $9 million this year through targeting use of this technology towards application adoption. And because they have this data, this is a major healthcare company, they're in the state of California, and because they have this data, it enables them to solve a lot of problems. Many for them were previously just unsolvable. And so not only have they targeted application adoption as a massive, big moving part, but they've also been able to take 5, 10, 20% off things like IT service and support, because now they have visibility through this data to things that they didn't have visibility to before. So they're moving savings across a spectrum of use cases and solution sets, and are seeing very substantial benefits. For this major company, this is one of the CIO's pet projects, and yet it's fairly secretive because they're doing things that other companies, even their best-in-class peers, are not yet doing. To get a sense of what's possible, this is how a dashboard might look for that advanced customer that's really implemented the technology and done all the heavy lifting around it. And they actually know how much utilization they're getting by department, by geography, by job title, by user. And they can start to attach it to business processes like order to cash, or if you're, for example, using products in the SAP world, to transactions, or even to a module, they can start to see where the performance falls out. So this is a very different way of looking at things. You're assigning economic value to the efficiency and effectiveness of your people. How much time in their day are they expected to be working with your mainstream ERP or your mainstream CRM system? Suppose you're working with Salesforce and you've got 5,000 users and you expect them to be working 6 hours a day. Well, for that 6 hours, how efficient and effective are they on a comparative basis, on a current basis? How many errors are they having problems with? And when you have lots of users and you can get a sense of the time they're spending and the problems they're having, you can start to build an economic cost for the lost productivity. And that becomes a huge hot button because the numbers astound people. They are amazing numbers, and they're in the many, many millions of dollars. And as we talked to before, besides the 90 to 95% not having any sense of what these numbers might be, they still have all the symptoms, which are other unaddressed pain points. And these pain points, you'll say, well, how does 45% of training being delivered to the wrong need? Well, we understand that. We give a standard course. How can that be related to application adoption? Well, it's part of the problem because people are not getting in your environment, for your industry, for your transaction set, the training that they need exactly. And you can see with this technology exactly what the top user errors are real time as they unfold. You can have someone call your service desk and know in the life of the phone call that they probably don't have to recreate the problem. You can see what it is. You can see what they did. And so all of these symptoms are there in that 90-95% of the world not using this technology or these best practices. And they're seeing these kinds of symptoms. So you have a lot of leverage here that you can exercise as you start to move the technology in-house. Now, to really frame this and explain it and then dig into the best practices a little further, you want to step back and you want to really see, well, where are these KPI coming from and what are they exactly? And if you look at your data center, whether you're in line of business or you're in IT, you probably have very, very comprehensive wiring and plumbing all around the infrastructure, really everything below the keyboard that user touches, the database servers, the networks. You've got a lot of APM tools that tell you what's going on. And the technology that starts to provide a view for the user and enable you to reach out for these new application adoption savings revolves around user experience management and user performance management and those technologies. So really, to frame the opportunity for yourself, there are two questions that can help you gauge the organizational maturity that you have. If you talk to someone on your IT team, they might not completely understand, and you'll say, well, do we do this? And they'll say, sure, we measured this and this. And this is really the true test. These two questions are the true test. The first question is, for all of the error we have in our environment, across our entire enterprise, globally, or if you're local, across your state, wherever it might be, what percent of our error is system error in our production environment? And the same question about user error. So percentage implies that someone sees the whole picture. And user error, 95% of the companies out there have no data on this. So the reality is that the sharp CIO, who in those 90-95% of the companies out there is status quo, is state of the art, maybe it's not as good as it can be, will say, well, wait a minute, I know how many user errors hit my help desk, and I know how many user errors, how many system errors I have because of my APM tools, and I think this is what it is. But what hits the help desk is a teeny fraction of what's really happening. And when we go out there in the industry and we connect our technology and we plumb a new account, we do a proof of concept or we do an initial implementation, we work with some of the largest companies in the world in a variety of industries, we find data that absolutely amazes the CIO. They're fairly stunned. We tell them that 8.4% of all the error they have in that application, let's say it's Siebel or it's Salesforce or it's SAP, whatever it is system error. And that they can kind of relate to. They have a lot of tools that measure pieces and bits of that. They don't quite see the same performance at the desktop that we do, but they have a lot of data. And then we say, well, that implies something huge, which is 91% exists, and it's user error. It's about your human capital, your business process performance. It's about people making a lot of mistakes, either because the custom transactions are poorly designed, or because they haven't been trained, or because some of the fields are just unclear in standard transactions, and all of the becauses can be listed in a row, but that's 91% of your error. So think about the CIO that doesn't have this data, or the line of business exec that doesn't see this, right? Instead of 91%, they see 1 in 8 of those. So what they think they see is their world is this pile of user error that gets reported to the help desk, and then this other pile that's kind of the same size for system error. And the reality is it's very different. And the economic opportunity now is because you have this data. Now you can start to measure things you couldn't measure before, and you can start to fix them. And the economic value of that is quite huge. So you start to ask the question now, how can we have an objective view that we have things that we can measure? How can we assess the economic value of the gaps? And then what steps can we take to shrink them? And the view becomes very different. When you're sitting at that IT desk, everything is reactive. The user calls in a moment of crisis. There is no proactive hardly ever at all. But with this technology now, you see the impact to every user as you try to understand application adoption, whether they're calling the help desk or not. And you're seeing every problem they have, every issue they have, and you're now looking down the road instead of having these things hit your windshield real time as you go through the day. So the first best practice really is to think about, where is my first target of opportunity? Where am I going to go to find a project that will have great economic results, that line of business execs and senior managers in IT will feel really good about, that will make my team and myself heroes of the day because we're going to improve the effectiveness of the organization. We're going to do something that's very low risk but very high reward. We're not touching any back-end systems. We're not doing anything too scary, yet we're potentially going to save millions of dollars for the organization. And so let's pick the biggest targets. And what we find when we look at all the data in places like Gartner, the average enterprise has a couple of thousand applications or more. But if you said which ones get most of the money and most of the time, it's usually 5 to absolutely at most 10. You know, in a heavily regulated industry, for example, life sciences, there'll be special compliance applications and chargeback applications. And in those industries, you're going to have extensions around ERP. But it's really the big 5 to 10 that drive your enterprise. It's ERP, it's CRM, it's the front end of Outlook that is linked to ERP and CRM. And then you really want to think about, you know, the notion of a qualified user. When we did some of our market studies here to just say, how big could this be? How excited could our customers be? We came up with the notion of a qualified user. A qualified user is a user whose execution of that application is mainstream and enterprise mission critical. They spend hours a day on it, and they use a prescribed workflow. And at least as often as not, the word transaction or core business process applies to what they do. So ERP, order to cash, boy, that's a qualified user 5, 6, 7 hours a day. Or accounting, or human capital management in the HR team, right? And so we really try to zero in on those applications because that's where you have the greatest opportunity to find the best reward at extremely low risk and drive a significant economic return for your enterprise. Number 2, and you'll see some of the graphs on this, you know, Ilya will bring some of this stuff up and the picture will tell 1,000 words, is to really start to understand your baseline. Where are you? Who's doing really well? And who's doing less well? And then trying to understand why, because now you're looking at metrics and data you have never seen before. Your CIO is seeing data that he or she has never seen before. And now you really want to start to segment it and use the capability of the analytics dashboards to understand what you have. You know, ultimately the technologies that you're enabled with here are analytics dashboards that tie into the performance of the different systems and the users. And so because they're analytics and because they tie into your systems, they can see, you know, users by job title, users by geography, transactions by type, all sorts of ways you could slice it. You could actually go down to and slice the time and performance and error rate on, for example, a single button in a module in part of a Siebel transaction. And all of that stuff comes out of the box. Now, the other thing that's important to understand, we're not talking about too much of the the product per se today or things that are specific to us, our differentiation. But it's important to note that for this to really work, everything needs to come out of the box. Most of what you have, when someone wants to implement a typical tool set on the IT side, is scripted. And for this to work, the analytics needs to see every piece of data you have and then discover the opportunities. And it is almost impossible to script if someone said, hey, how about my Siebel CRM, or how about my, my 5 major modules of SAP? That stuff would just take people years to do. And then every time it changes, you have to update. And it doesn't include your custom transactions. It's just huge. Our technology comes out of the box and picks up everything, every screen, every module, every button. And for major applications, for instance, Siebel or SAP, or we could go through a list here, it picks up all of the customizations automatically. And so when you look at scripted tools for doing anything in the data center, even forget application adoption trying to tackle this, the notion that you can script everything is really false. To do that takes a tremendous amount of work and maintenance, and many customers never get there. So let the user beware. So now that you've got your baseline, you've been able to see where your super user adoption gap is. You've been able to see how they're performing, what their error rates are, and how do they compare to the rest of your enterprise. And over time, we're going to try to work with our customers to understand the enterprise adoption gap for same companies and same industry as the data becomes more and more available. And so think about this adoption gap. So here you are, and you've kind of got a sense of your organization, and you haven't fixed anything yet. You're just looking at data you've never seen, and you're understanding that you're losing 17% of your daily productivity to problems that could be solved. 17% more of the time you're spending on salaries that you expect people to be using the ERP system, they're not effective or efficient at using it. And so now you can see these costs and you want to tackle them. But one area that you'll spot right away is when you enable this technology and you watch a change management event unfold. Nothing could be more exciting for a major enterprise. If it's not a SaaS technology, if it's an on-premise, a big new release internally, you've got your custom transactions, all that stuff, you roll it out, and almost invariably, as sure as the sun will rise, all sorts of things start to go wrong. And just like it hits your IT service desk, it hits your windshield, there's no warning, it's happening despite all of the user acceptance testing you did and all the training you did. It's always that way. And now with this technology, you can see these things unfold real time and actually position yourself to get ahead of it. And that's very, very new and very, very different. So now you need to pick your targets. And one of the technologies that, if you're on the IT side, we have a lot of business users on the call, so I'll apologize, but if you're on the IT side, as an old programmer, you do something called profiling. When you build an application, you measure a piece of it, and then you start to figure out, how do I make that piece faster and faster? Well, you can profile the performance of your system end to end through your users. That's really part of application adoption, is to get them to be more efficient and effective. You can see, where are my longest times for execution exactly, right down to the time it takes the browser to fill on the screen, right through Citrix, whatever it is, we know exactly what it's taking. And then you can start to say, well, why is that happening? Why is this cluster of users in accounting in Des Moines having 22% higher error rates? Why is this group of users in our London office having 23% higher transaction times? And some of the problems could be system level, some of the problems could be user level, but now you're going to start to see the impact of these problems against the user performance. And now you're going to be able to pick your targets. Here are my 3 biggest problems. Now, what am I going to do to remediate them? Will it be targeted training? Will I have to rewrite certain transactions? Will I have to consider eliminating transactions? And the greatest single area that I find for user trauma is almost invariably, especially during a change management event, What impacts application adoption the most are custom transactions. And with the best of intentions, right? We know which road is paved with good intentions, right? Custom transactions in big enterprises, they have 1,000 or 2 or 3 of these, 3,000 of these things, and they're always a source of pain. And then there are existing transactions that aren't as smooth as they could be, and there's a self-help portal that needs more help itself, and certainly targeted training, which is one of the easiest and best ways to go at this. We have one customer, Disney, and every quarter they look at different components for application adoption and say, this quarter we see a problem with expense report processing, and the system they picked was SAP. And they looked at all the workflow, because our system will show you what people did, exactly what errors they had, and why it was taking long. And then they targeted remediation. They said, well, we're going to do some special targeted training for these 2 groups. We're going to do some things to the self-help portal. We're going to get some pop-up messaging and some other things that will work with us in conjunction to fix this. And they were able to reduce by X% the number of problems. And that immediately rippled through to economic impact. And at the end of the quarter, the team lead and her helper issued a report that said, we tackled this one transaction of which she has a list of like 100 things. And we were able to save, Disney X hundreds of thousands of dollars by improving operations, 20-something%. And that's the kind of way you can go after this. You can pick your high-profile targets, you can remediate them, and you can measure the economic benefit. And constantly, you're now enabled, because you can measure it, you can improve it, you can compare the baseline to your current state. Change management is a sharp line in the sand, kind of those thin red lines we hear about, where there's certainly a new current state and you want to watch it. But you can do it for almost anything, by almost any geography or user group or transaction type or module type. And we really become part of the ultimate CIO dashboard, because once people start to see this data, the line of business wants to see it and the CIO wants to see it. And that, with the economic benefits, make us all heroes for sure. We're going to segue to Ilya's demonstration so you can get a good look at the technology. The short preface to that is that this is an analytics framework. It's a dashboard. The system does not affect anything in your back end. We install separately, and we have an agent architecture where there's a small piece of our technology that sits on the desktop and measures response. We see exactly to the time a browser fills what your response is. So even on the system side, we have the most accurate view of performance in the enterprise. And if you have an agent architecture, And we've helped users uncover, just as a byproduct of this, performance problems perhaps through their Citrix virtualization or some other thing that other network tools and other capabilities would not show. So the technology lets you see everything at the desktop about the performance of the system, everything down from the keyboard, and the user's efficiency and effectiveness, so you can drive your strategy for application adoption.
So one of the things that you'll know right away is, because we're using an agent technology that sits on a desktop, we're able to monitor all of the applications that the end user utilize. You could have multiple instances of SAP, you could have other ERP or enterprise applications. All of them are monitored automatically and dynamically. Now, not only do we monitor the number of users that are utilizing each application, but we're also monitoring the active time. Now, this active time is unique to NOAA. This is not the traditional, APM or back-end monitoring of how long a user is logged into any particular system. Because the NOAA agent sits on a desktop, we're actually able to provide a true measure of adoption as to how long the user is utilizing that application. So, for example, if the user walks away and goes to meeting, or if the user switches to a different application, we're able to detect that idle time. So the NOAA solution, the NOAA technology, is the only true way to measure an adoption of an application, because we're able to tell you how long it's actually taking the users, how much time they're truly spending within that target application. Now, we don't stop there. We don't just go on an application level, which is where traditional APM or back-end server applications stop. We could go deeper. Because we have an agent on the desktop that could actually see inside that application, We could go on a transaction level. We could go on a screen level. So, for example, if the users are utilizing, 100, 200 transactions, all of them are captured, and we have the active time and the active users that are utilizing each transaction. And again, as Mike talked about, nothing here is scripted. This is 100% dynamic discovery. And this includes custom objects, custom Z codes, for example, within SAP, or within Siebel, let's say you have custom screens. All of those are captured out of the box dynamically. Now, because we're able to create a baseline of the user's activity within the system, and this line here represents the active time that the users are spending within a particular transaction, and in this case, we're actually looking at a custom transaction within SAP. Because we have the capability to monitor all the users all the time, and we have the historical analytical data, we could then start to plot what's called the adoption gap that Mike talked about. Based on the historic information and based on your goals that you've set out to achieve the ROI from your investment into the enterprise application, we could identify where your current usage of the application is as compared to an expected usage based on the historical timelines. So here, for example, the blue line represents the actual adoption, and the black line represents the expected adoption. And by the way, this could work even for cyclical transactions. So if you have financial close that is only once a quarter or once a month, we're able to compare to any baseline. And this adoption gap, this is where the problems lie. This is where, if you're not being able to achieve the expected adoption rate, this is what's having the financial impact to your organization. Now, the obvious question is, how do you quantify this? And this is, of course, the next level. And Mike talked about being able to quantify the cost of that adoption gap. So by leveraging information about your investment into a particular business process, by understanding what the business process is achieving for your organization, what you could start doing is actually putting a cost associated with that adoption gap. And we could do this on a business process level. One of the unique features of the NOAA solution is that we could import information about your business processes from your business process maps to give you truly an executive level dashboard for CIO and for CFO to really understand what is the cost of that adoption gap. So now that we've identified the adoption gap and we know that it's costing your organization, bottom line, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the roadblocks that are leading to that adoption gap? And of course, we all know there are many. One of the factors to look at is the response of the application. How effective is the application to the end user? Is the reason why the user is not adopting the application because it's slow? And you hear this all the time, right? It's not the users, it's the application. So the question is, can we provide an objective performance metric of the application from an end user perspective? And the answer here is only possible through the desktop agent that the NOAA provides, because as Mike indicated, not only do we provide a response metric for every operation, for every click, for every interaction of the user within any screen, within any transaction, but we do this end-to-end. Now, by that, what I mean is from the moment the user clicks on any button until it traverses the network, until it hits the server side and comes back and renders the application back to the end user, that's the uniqueness, the cumulative end-to-end response time that NOAA provides. So for the first time, you have this objective metric that could really tell you if the end users are struggling because the application is slow and the application is not responding to the end users as it should. Another important area are the system errors and the user errors. And this is, again, unique to NOAA in that we're not just capturing some, backhand logs or pre-scripted, events in the application, but we're actually able to capture every message, every error that the user gets from the application. It could be system error, like a crash or a database connection problem, but what's more important, it could be the user errors. If the user is trying to enter information into a transaction and it's invalid, or there's a master data problem, we capture 100% of the messages, even custom messages, out of the box. So if we look at this transaction here, we have a financial accounting transaction, business process actually, and we see a drop in the adoption of that process. And we see that the user errors have gone up. So let's investigate now. Let's take a look. We also could pinpoint specific screens that are actually having those errors. So, Mike talked about some of the remediation steps. What is this block to adoption, and how do we tackle it? Well, maybe there's a reason why the screen is having so many user errors. Maybe there's a poor design there. Maybe this is an opportunity to modify the screen to make it easier for the end users. Now, another thing that you'll notice at the bottom is look at the disparity between the user errors amongst the different users. Why is one user having 68 errors while John is having only 3 errors? Is John my super user? And the answer is by incorporating information about the end users, such as whether they're a super user, have they been trained or not, what department are they in, what functional role are they in. We call all of this information user attributes. By importing this into NOAA and utilizing the power of analytics, you could actually answer those questions. So you could actually understand what department, for example, or what user group, or what regional location is actually having the highest degree of errors. So then you could take the remediation steps necessary to alleviate these problems and then ultimately drive the adoption higher. Now, we don't stop here. We don't stop at the analytics and just pinpointing, where your the adoption problems are and where are the roadblocks, but we actually help you then with a remediation program. If you really want to help the end users, you need to have the complete context as to when these errors have happened. What did the user do? What did he do before the error? What did he do after the error? How did he get to that error? And historically, the only way to get that information is to basically investigate and interrogate the end user, which of course causes lots of pain and headaches to the end users and ultimately is not effective in driving the adoption of the application. With a NOAA solution and the power of the workflow, you have all that information at your fingertips. So from the moment the user logs into any application, you can see step by step every application, every transaction, every screen the user navigated to. Every time the user clicks on any operation, we're actually capturing how long was the response time. Why did this take 27 seconds? Or if the user is opening up a screen, how long is he staying on that screen? Why is the user spending, sometimes minutes on certain screens? Is it because he's not sure what to do? And what about the user errors? Let's take a look at some of the errors here. Why is the user experiencing errors here? Account is 0. Line item is ignored. We have all the information we need to be able to remediate this. We have the transaction, we have the screen, we could export this information, we could escalate it. Every time an error happens, we have all the information we need at our fingertips. So this is the type of data that actually helps you. And there's a lot of other use cases. Today we're talking about adoption, but of course the same user workflow is helpful in what Mike talked about, sustainability and helping the end users in their operation in terms of user support, in terms of super user support, and so forth. So this is some of the areas that we wanted to talk about. There's a lot more. And of course, we'll gladly always schedule additional deep dive sessions and demos. Please contact our sales organization.